Welcome back. This is lesson 2 in our credit unit. This lesson is all about the credit costs. So when we left off last lesson, we were discussing which option is better, and we gave you a whole bunch of scenarios: purchasing a computer, a stereo system, car, TV, and truck. And I had you fill out this sheet. It was task, pick, an option, where you had the task of finding the best deal, and you had some math to do. Now, if your math isn't correct, that's okay. Right now, your job is just to kind of find what you believe would be the best deal. If you weren't really understanding which was the better deal, I just want you to know that later in this lesson and lessons to come, we will be doing the math that kind of helps you figure out what's the better deal to compare the monthly cost and then the total cost for these scenarios. But what I wanted you to see is that there are always going to be options. Sometimes the options are good, sometimes the options aren't so great. But salespeople are really hoping that their consumers are going to make purchasing decisions based on whether something seems like a good deal rather than doing the math to see if it really is or not. So these big ticket items, purchasing a computer or a stereo system, a car, a TV, even things like purchasing furniture. These are all things that can be financed, and stores really do hope that you're going to pick the option that gives them the most money. So they're going to give you what looks like a really good deal, and if you don't do the math, you're not going to know if that's a good deal or not. Can you find another deal or not? So as a reminder, here's what we aim to do during this lesson. We're going to answer these questions. How is credit used? What are the typical costs of credit? Because anytime that you purchase things with credit, you're going to have to pay extra unless you pay within a specific amount of time. How do I calculate the cost of using credit? That one's super important. A lot of people don't understand how much using credit is going to cost them in the end. And then you're going to use what you've learned through this lesson to figure out borrowing options for a specific situation and what the best borrowing option actually is. So as we talk about credit, I think it's important for you to understand some vocab. So the language of credit. What does it mean to buy on credit? Well, buying on credit means that you're making a purchase now and you're promising to repay that money later. So let's say I wanted to buy a new couch for my family room, and this couch costs $1,000. Well, I don't have the money to pay $1,000 up front, so that must mean that I can't take the couch home, right? Well, that's where buying on credit comes in. If I buy on credit, it means that I can go to the couch salesman and say, "Excuse me, sir, I'd like to buy this couch, but I don't have the money right now, so can I make payments to you later?" That's what buy on credit means. I have a promise that I'm going to pay back the money even though I can't pay it all right now. So the word credit means that someone is willing to loan you money or loan you an item that you are going to pay for later. And then there's the word principal. Principal is that cost of the item that you bought. It's what you are going to pay for the item. Now, you might not pay it right away, but it's something that you will pay in the future. But when you buy on credit, not only are you responsible to pay back that principal, so that would be the $1,000 that I owe for the couch, not only am I responsible to pay back the $1,000, but I'm also going to have to pay interest if I purchase on credit. And that is what the lender, in this case the couch salesman, is going to charge me for not being able to pay right away. So interest is what the lender charges for using credit, and it's usually a percent of how much I have to pay. So if I wanted to buy that couch, the couch salesman could say, "Yeah, you can purchase this couch on credit, but it's going to cost you 20% in interest." So if I bought a couch for $1,000 and I had to pay 20% extra, I would actually be purchasing that couch for $1,200. The The bonus being that I don't have to pay all that money up front. So if I don't have $1,000, I don't have to pay it up front, but I am going to have to pay more in the long run. Sometimes that's not a bad thing. If you don't have the money right away for something, a good or a service that you really need, then interest is okay. But it's a good idea to understand how interest is calculated to see if it's something that you can even afford in the long run. There's a couple different formulas that you can use to figure out interest, and different lenders use different formulas. So we're going to look at that in this lesson. How do you calculate interest to see if something is a good deal or not? So here's another example other than the couch scenario that you could see. So here's an example. Mariah's mom borrowed $10,000. That's the principal to buy a used car on credit. So she couldn't afford to buy the car with just $10,000 right there, then and there at the car lot. So she bought the car on credit. By the end of 3 years, she repaid the $10,000 that was borrowed, plus 3.5% interest. So she didn't just pay $10,000 on that car after 3 years, she had to pay an extra amount. She had to pay $549 in interest. Now, over 3 years, that's not a bad amount. And that 3.5% interest, that's a very low interest rate. Sometimes credit lenders will charge you up to 20% interest. So 3% interest isn't bad, but you can see that Mariah's mom paid more for the car than it was at the beginning. She paid $549 in interest because that's what the lender charged her since she couldn't purchase the car in full right away. So borrowing money and buying on credit really does add to the total cost of a purchase. So here's another example. Jesse's brother had a flat tire on his car. He didn't have the money on hand to buy a new tire that day. So he couldn't pay fully for the tire that day, but he was able to purchase a new tire by promising to repay the $150 owed, that's the principal, for the tire, plus 10% interest in 30 days. So in 30 days, not only will he have paid for the tire, but he's also going to pay 10% interest on that. So is Jesse going to pay more or less than $150 for the tire? Think about that question. Well, if you think back to the vocabulary that we just talked about, interest is what the lender charges for using credit. So you are going to have to pay more money for that interest. So for Jesse, he's going to have to pay more than $150. Actually, 10% for about a month's time means that he's really only going to pay $1.25 in interest. So that's not too much more than the price of the tire, but it does mean that he's going to have to pay more than the actual cost. Well, how could Jesse have avoided paying more than the cost for the tire? What are some options that he had? How could he have prevented having to pay interest on this tire? Well, in our very first unit, we talked about budgeting and savings. Had Jesse had some money put away for savings for a car, or for his car, he could have been able to use what he had saved to pay for this tire. That way he wouldn't have had to pay the $1.25 extra. So I do want to point out that interest, it's the main cost involved in borrowing. So when you borrow something, this is the cost of borrowing, the interest. And you know, the payments that are made to repay the borrowed amounts, they're going to vary depending on how your interest is calculated. And your interest is going to vary based on how much percent you have to pay back, how much you borrowed in the first place, and how often interest is calculated. And I'm going to show you a formula later on that might help you understand. But interest is the main cost when you borrow. When we're discussing, you know, how much it costs to actually borrow money from somebody. And it's calculated in a number of different ways. So one of the easiest ways to figure out interest is called the simple interest formula. Simple interest calculates a lump sum or a big amount of money that has to be repaid on a due date. So in Jesse's brother's example, he had 30 days to pay back the $150 for the tire, and that simple interest was calculated into that. So Jesse's brother actually had to pay $151.25 for his tire rather than just the $150. So here is how you figure out just the interest. So the interest is in dollars, and that's it. We find out how much extra you have to pay by taking the principal, how much the item was at first, multiplying it by the interest rate, which could be 3.5% or 10% or even close to 20%, and we have to change that percent to a decimal. That means we move the decimal places 2 movements to the left, and then we multiply it by time, which is in years. So I'll show you what happens if we deal with months, but time is usually done in years. Okay, so this is the simple interest formula. An easy, quick way to remember it is I equals PRT. If you look on page 10 in your student booklet, you will see the simple interest formula printed there. That is something that I will always give you, but it's something I equals PRT that hopefully by the end of this unit you will know and be able to calculate. So I know that this calculator is kind of covering up the interest formula, but if we wanted to figure out for Jesse's brother how much he was going to have to pay in interest, we would take the principal, that was $150 that he owed, times the interest rate, which was 10%. If I change that to a decimal, that's 0.10, multiplied by the time. Now, he had 30 days to do it. 30 days is about a month, which if we're dealing with parts of a year, since a year is what we're dealing with for time, we do have to use that as a fraction. So that would be 1 divided by 12. So that's 1 month out of 12 months is 30 days. And when we multiply that together, you see that it's $1.25 in interest. So when I add that to the $150 principal, Jesse's brother has to pay a total of $151.25, and he has 30 days to pay that. So let's take some time to practice how to use the simple interest formula. Look in your binder for activity 2.3. It's called Simply Tell the Total. It looks like this. The directions say that we're going to use the simple interest formula, I equals PRT, to calculate the interest and the total amount to be repaid in one lump sum for the purchases below. So it wants us to find the interest and how much total you have to pay for all of these items. The first example has been done for you. So interest equals principal times rate times time in years. And then it gives you that it's $20 interest and then a total of $120. So let's see how they calculated this. I equals PRT, so the first thing I need is my principal. That's $100. So I can type that in my calculator, 100, times the interest rate is 40%. Now when we talk about our rate, we need that as a decimal. So I'm going to take this decimal from 40.0. I'm going to take that decimal and I'm going to move it 2 places to the left. So it's actually going to be 100 times 0.400. Now the zeros don't really matter when I put them in my calculator, but I think you'll probably be more comfortable keeping them in there. Now the time in years, it's a half of a year. We can keep this as a fraction because it's dealing with years as it is. If this had said 6 months, we would have had to convert that to years. But they were nice. They kept this in years for you. And for your other 2 examples, you will not have to worry about converting. So I'm going to multiply my principal times my rate times the time, 1/2. When you put that in your calculator, you can do 1 divided by 2. That will give you your fraction of 1/2. Actually, I'm going to go back and put that in parentheses just so that my calculator understands that I'm multiplying this by 1/2. It helps with order of operations. Okay, I multiply that and I see that an interest rate is going to be $20. So that's saying 100 times 0.4 times 0.5 or 1/2 is $20. Now that means that the total amount, I don't just have to repay my principal of $100, I have to pay back that $20 as well. I'm going to have you go ahead for the rest of this section, a lesson, and do the big screen TV and the college loan. Remember that the interest rate, the decimal needs to be moved 2 places. So the interest rate of 7% would be 0.07 in your calculator. An interest rate of 3.5% would be 0.035. So go ahead and do that, and we'll check this next.